Hi, everyone. We're going to get started now. So hello and welcome to today's webinar. It's titled Getting Started with Red Hat Openshift Service on AWS and Red Hat Training. My name's Alexandra. I'll be your MC for the next hour, and thank you for joining the conversation. So before we get started, let's cover the webinar functionalities. So during the webinar, everyone's microphones will be muted, but we want this to be an open discussion. So if you have any questions, please enter them in the Q&A or chat window at the bottom of your screen. There'll be a dedicated question and answer session after the presentation. So today's webinar is being recorded and a copy of the session will be sent to all registrants at the end of the week. Today's speaker is John Walter, Solutions Architect Training and Certification at Red Hat. John is a solutions architect for the Red Hat Training and Certification team specializing in cloud and DevOps technologies. He's a Red Hat certified architect with deep knowledge of the Red Hat Enterprise Linux, Ansible automation, and the OpenShift container platform. So you might ask yourself, why choose ExitCertified for your Red Hat training? So professionals like you have been training with us since 2001. You want to know your training provider has the credibility to earn your organization's trust, and ExitCertified delivers. We offer vendor-approved IT training, which is our only business. When you train in our facilities, you'll find well-equipped classrooms and friendly staff who are dedicated to making your learning experience comfortable and productive. And when you train remotely with our IMVP virtual platform, you'll see that our investment in technology makes online learning every bit as engaging as taking training in person. So if you have any questions about why you should take a Red Hat training course with ExitCertified or which course is right for you, contact us at the URL on this slide. Okay, so let's get started.
All right. Well, thank you for that warm introduction. Again, I'm John Walter, Solutions Architect for the training certification team at Red Hat. I've been at Red Hat for about 6 years now in a few different roles, but within the last 3 years, covering our training and certification team. And I apologize, it sounds like there is an ambulance about to drive by my house. So the joys of working from home. So today we're going to be talking about Red Hat Openshift Service on AWS and a couple of the other managed OpenShift and self-managed OpenShift offerings that are available, as well as how you can get started with Red Hat training. If you're not familiar with OpenShift or with Kubernetes, we'll give kind of a brief introduction to that, why a lot of organizations are starting to move towards a Kubernetes platforms like OpenShift. We'll talk a lot about different ways that OpenShift works with AWS, obviously pretty much the largest cloud platform out there. And then towards the end, we'll talk a little bit about ways that you can get started actually working towards training and certifying on OpenShift. We will have time for questions at the end, so make sure if you do have questions throughout, you're dropping them in that Q&A portion within Zoom, and we'll be able to address those towards the end. So without further ado, let's get started. Really, like I said, we're going to start really kind of setting the stage on what OpenShift is. And really, if you're familiar with Kubernetes, but you're not familiar with OpenShift, OpenShift is really a smarter Kubernetes platform built for the enterprise. We know that, and what we hear from customers, around the world is that, their ability to create value for their end customers, whether that be internal customers, fellow employees or their actual external customers, it all depends on their ability to deliver their applications more quickly, efficiently, to be able to scale. And containers in Kubernetes really fundamentally enables DevOps. DevOps adoption has really skyrocketed with the proliferation of container technologies. Microservices, cloud native application development, all of these things have been really enabled based on containerization and really Kubernetes as container orchestration. And Red Hat certainly believes that, OpenShift is the best platform to deliver these applications across a hybrid cloud. Now, Kubernetes on its own is a really fantastic tool for container orchestration, but I wouldn't call it a complete solution. It's not really built for the enterprise. What it does really, really well is container orchestration, but what it doesn't do are a lot of other things, right? Installing Kubernetes and playing around with it for many is really not that big of an issue. I would say that you can download and install Kubernetes and have a cluster running, on your own hardware really, really quickly, probably about 15 minutes, quite honestly. But getting it really ready for production to run those business critical applications for your enterprise takes a lot more, right? There are a bunch of different things that need to be pieced together and tested and hardened for operations. And that's again, like a self-managed Kubernetes installation. We'll talk obviously about, managed OpenShift in just a little bit. But as an example, take identity management. Identity management is not a component built in natively to Kubernetes. So with Kubernetes, you're providing a lot of access to, critical internal systems, whether that's to your employees, to your partners, to your end customers. And so you have to adhere to the security rules that you have established within your organization. And the way to do that, just in the terms of identity management, is to build or write an integration between Kubernetes and whatever your company's approved LDAP is. In order to do that, you have to have knowledge of something like DEX. DEX is an open source identity system. You have to have knowledge of Kubernetes, which obviously, if you're just starting with Kubernetes, you may not have. And then obviously you need knowledge of the integration systems to your company's LDAP. You'll also need to have visibility into like logging, things like that. So you need to hook up something like Prometheus, another open source monitoring and alerting tool, so that you can have full visibility into your Kubernetes operations and testing and in production. And that's just one piece, right? That's just identity management. These things don't come with vanilla Kubernetes out of the box. Now, Kubernetes provides a lot of pluggable interfaces, but you'll see on this slide, this is a map of all the cloud native components that you need to choose from in order to run like an enterprise grade Kubernetes. And I'm not sure that you can see my cursor, but here on the left side in this orchestration and management side, that's where Kubernetes lives. And there are components of Kubernetes that are included, like etcd is a component of Kubernetes. Cryo, the container runtime to actually run these containers, is a part of Kubernetes as well. But, I mentioned identity management as a piece. What about, continuous integration and delivery tooling? What about security? What about storage? All of these are different components that have to be integrated into a vanilla Kubernetes platform in order to actually run within production. I'll leave this on the screen just for a second, because I think this is one of the most fascinating things to look at. If you're interested, this is just an interactive landscape. If you go to l.cncf.io, you can actually take a look at this, the latest version of the map. I took this screenshot, I believe, earlier or late last week. So this is probably pretty up to date. But really what you're seeing, Cloud Native Computing Foundation, they're the open source governing body that's home to Kubernetes. This is essentially what their first project was. And Red Hat, other than Google, who is the main sponsor of Kubernetes, is the largest contributor to the Kubernetes project. So Red Hat obviously has a lot of stake and a lot of knowledge in all of these different open source projects. But really to kind of drive home, right? Vanilla Kubernetes services, they're not things that you really should be focusing your time on. That's why a lot of organizations are moving towards more of a Kubernetes platform, something like OpenShift, or obviously a lot of the other vendors out there have their own kind of alternative to OpenShift. But what you want out of the box is a platform that's built around Kubernetes as a service that includes all these other individual services, right? You don't want to have to upskill your team on containerization on Kubernetes, as well as integrating security and networking and storage. And how are we going to store all of these container images in a public or private registry? How are we going to integrate CI/CD tooling? What about a service mesh? All of these different things you can do on your own. If you were running a really small business, I always give the example of like my dad is a real estate appraiser. And so when he asked me to help build him a website, and he told me the features he needed to have, and needed to be able to take payments, he wanted to be able to have scheduling. Obviously it's a web server itself. So, those are three different services that, as kind of a project for myself, I just build as containers. Now, for myself, my dad, I would say he's, successful, but in the terms of his own success as just running a one-man business, he may have 10 or 15 or 20 clients at any given time. That's something that is easy to manage across just a few different containers. It doesn't really require all of these different services. I'm not pushing application commits every single day. I don't really need a lot of visibility into what's going on. So, for me, quote unquote enterprise, it's really at a very, very small scale. But obviously when you're working for, a larger organization, you may be running thousands or tens of thousands of applications simultaneously. And each of these different pieces, each of these different components, these individual services are really, really critical for running and making this an enterprise grade platform. And so that's really where OpenShift comes into play, and some of these other like enterprise grade Kubernetes distributions. OpenShift really provides all of these individual services that are needed to make this platform so that you don't have to focus on actually building the platform. Now, OpenShift out of the box, when we talk about OpenShift, and we'll get into this in just a little bit, but we're really talking about a few different flavors of OpenShift. Right now, we're kind of looking at a self-managed OpenShift, or what we call OpenShift Container Platform. And this is where you're operating it yourself, you're deploying it on really any given infrastructure. Maybe this is something that you want to have running within on-premise within your own data center. Maybe it's something that you want to have running on multiple clouds, whether public or private. And the way that you're able to interact and work with OpenShift across each of these different infrastructures is going to be the same. The same kind of skill set you need for initial deployment, for ongoing operations. All of those different components are going to be the same no matter where you're deploying OpenShift. But one thing that we have discovered, especially in my time over the last 3 years, is that there are a lot of organizations that are really lacking the skill set around Kubernetes. Their developers are already starting to get spun up on building cloud native applications, and they're starting to go through the efforts of containerizing, or even breaking down some of their monolithic applications and building microservices. But on the administration or operations side, they don't yet have the skill set. And that's why they're turning to organizations like Red Hat to help train them, or they're going out and buying, folks that are coming equipped with that skill set. This can be costly, right? And that's where organizations are really starting to turn towards a managed solution where they can really rely on subject matter experts at Red Hat or at AWS, which we'll talk about in just a little bit, to really get them started quickly, where they can really start delivering in that business value, building out applications, and just worrying about adapting to this platform much more efficiently. And to kind of drive the point home, we work with these different upstream communities, just like we have been for the last 25 plus years with Linux. We're also contributing to all of these other upstream communities. If you think back to that slide with all of the different Kubernetes projects, we work with each of these communities when they are ready to make commitments or commits on a specific version of a product. We then go through, we harden it, we add, security enhancements, feature enhancements, and then we bake that into our OpenShift, and that's what we ship to our customers. And so, we're providing, service level agreements, we're providing lifecycle management, and with something like a managed solution, we're providing even more. And so we'll jump right into that now. OpenShift and AWS, I think, we'll talk about a few different ways that, Red Hat and AWS have partnered together to provide OpenShift both as a product or as a platform and also as a service. So to kind of take a step back before we really dive into, what Red Hat Openshift Service on AWS is, I think it's important to provide a little bit of a background on really what OpenShift is, right? So when we talk about OpenShift, we're typically talking about OpenShift Container Platform. And this is, a platform for building and running container-based applications and virtual machines with that enterprise grade Kubernetes, right? And what we're talking about is like, accelerated innovation, right? OpenShift provides or allows business to really innovate and iterate in shorter cycles. So they're able to really deliver, richer, higher quality experiences to their internal and external users. It's a flexible and comprehensive platform, right? So it gives that comprehensive but flexible platform. It gives businesses the agility to execute on their different strategies using infrastructure and frameworks and technologies that they choose, right? So you have the flexibility to run OpenShift on really any infrastructure of your choosing, because what's sitting on top of that is a container grade version of Linux, which is the standardized platform that's running across all of the different infrastructure. and again, it is built on Kubernetes, right? And so you're able to build and operate applications with the confidence of knowing that underneath the hood is still Kubernetes, although, what we're providing on top of that are, ease of management, continuous security through the application lifecycle, enterprise support, backed obviously by years of experience that Red Hat has with container technologies, Kubernetes, from obviously the largest open source organization in the world. And we have a lot of that authority, as I mentioned before, because Red Hat is, other than, again, Google, the main sponsor of Kubernetes. We are the largest contributor to the Kubernetes project, and a lot of other Linux and container and cloud native computing communities and projects. And so all this is really meant to allow our customers to adopt a really reliable, secure, and core platform. Standardizing on the right IT platforms, for the rest of your enterprise can help you avoid vendor or technology lock-in or service disruption or cost escalation, security breaches, compliance issues. We've been working with a lot of our partners like AWS, like Microsoft, to provide a really stable platform. We have been working with AWS for the last 5-10 years to provide RHEL as a service, a consumable service within AWS, so that you can run your RHEL servers across all kinds of different data centers and across the hybrid cloud. Red Hat has been a major contributor and kind of leader with making initiatives towards the hybrid cloud, and OpenShift is certainly kind of the platform that we are really all in on as far as serving as that basis for these workloads running across a hybrid cloud. Now, what AWS is providing, on the flip side, is a really high performance, scalable, and comprehensive cloud platform. Availability being a huge piece of this, right? So AWS provides this mesh of geographically dispersed availability zones and transit centers that ensure reliability without increasing latency. Especially when we get into customer use cases like providing their own cloud, and we talk about like multi-tenancy. We talk about edge computing, making sure that applications are running as close to the edge as possible. This is something that AWS provides really out of the box, that something like OpenShift is really tuned to run these applications at the edge, but AWS makes it even easier with something like availability zones. Elasticity, AWS lets you adapt to changing demand by automatically provisioning and retiring resources as needed. And that comes in conjunction with a lot of the features that Kubernetes provides. Scalability, elasticity, elasticability, that's not a word. All of these are things that OpenShift as a platform provides, but AWS is able to really, really kind of fine tune and hone. Agility, right? AWS lets you run both existing and cloud-based applications and integrate new technologies quickly and easily. And then security, there's built-in security features and more than 50 different compliance certifications and accreditations that allow you to protect your applications and environment. And so what OpenShift and AWS can provide together are really all of the benefits of OpenShift and having this vendor neutral, scalable platform running on the highest performing and scalable and comprehensive cloud platform that's out there. And so what we provide is really 3 different consumption models for OpenShift. The first of which that we'll talk about, and I'll actually start from the right and kind of work our way to the left. But we have obviously OpenShift Container Platform, and you can run OpenShift on top of AWS in a self-managed fashion. This means that you're essentially buying OpenShift from Red Hat, and then you're deploying it onto infrastructure that is within AWS. You're administrating yourself. You're relying on AWS for the infrastructure piece, but you're managing OpenShift as a platform on its own. And I would say that there are going to be use cases really for all 3 of these. The big one I would say for OpenShift Container Platform, it really depends on your use case. I gave the example a little bit early on, but maybe you are like a telco and you need to build essentially your own public cloud that's going to be consumed by your customers and their workloads. And so you want to probably have a lot more say in the actual ongoing operations of the platform. You want to be able to customize the deployment. You're probably having it run across multiple clusters on multiple clouds. You want to be able to have OpenShift running simultaneously, on bare metal within your own data center, but you also want to have it available on top of AWS, where you have more availability, more scalability, and not be as reliant on AWS's pricing model. So that would be one example where maybe you would want to run a self-managed deployment of OpenShift, but still have that running on AWS. The second would be OpenShift Dedicated. And this is a fully managed by Red Hat on AWS infrastructure. You're buying your subscription through Red Hat. You have your infrastructure purchased through either Red Hat or AWS. But again, now you're handing over the operations of the actual platform to Red Hat, right? You have essentially our site reliability engineers that are managing the services, and really what you're doing from your organization side is building the applications, you're deploying the applications. There's monitoring and chargeback and showback capabilities that are built into the platform, but you aren't having to rely on your operations team to really carry the load when it comes to operating the platform. The third piece here, and again, working from right to left, so on the far left here, is really kind of the meat and potatoes of what we're going to be talking today about, which is Red Hat Openshift Service on AWS. This is a Red Hat and AWS jointly managed and supported solution. Access is through the AWS console. It's all invoiced as part of your AWS bill. And the actual ongoing or initial deployment and ongoing operations of the platform is handled both jointly by Red Hat and AWS. And so really you're kind of getting the best of both worlds when it comes to that. You're able to build and deploy and manage your applications with OpenShift running natively on AWS. It's fully managed, again, jointly supported. The OpenShift piece is going to be completely supported throughout the life cycle by Red Hat. And it combines the power of OpenShift with obviously the industry's most comprehensive enterprise Kubernetes platform, and then the AWS public cloud. So, in these cases, the fully managed aspect of this, I think, is really, really critical, right? You no longer have to worry about equipping your team around the installation or the monitoring or the management or the maintenance or upgrades, right? You can take all of this off your team's plate, because all of that is performed by Red Hat SREs. And we're covering the complete stack, including the control plane, the worker nodes, any key services that are running. And so you can really kind of accelerate time to value, because not only are you getting management within the platform, but you're also getting managed application services. So things like OpenShift API management, which will come as part of your OpenShift subscription. OpenShift Streams, which is essentially a derivative or of Apache Kafka. Red Hat OpenShift Data Science, if you're into or looking to get into like AI or machine learning. So these are all available as part of a subscription service on top of what you would get with OpenShift Service on AWS. And really the goal here is to empower your developers to innovate. We want to give your team the focus and tools to accelerate the development process by leveraging familiar APIs and existing OpenShift tools for deployment within AWS. All the pricing with ROSA is ROSA, again, Red Hat Openshift Service on AWS, abbreviated ROSA. All of this is billed by AWS, so it's as part of potentially your already existing and potentially growing footprint with AWS, and really it's leveraging kind of, or I should say maybe clearing the way for a path towards really hybrid cloud deployments. ROSA, it delivers Kubernetes that most enterprises are already using on-premise today. So you can start to really simplify the ability to shift your workloads to the AWS public cloud as business needs dictate. There still may always be a need to have certain services running on-prem or potentially on a private cloud, something like OpenStack. But the more and more as you need to, you can have more flexibility And again, all of these different deployment options are not only valid, but they work to really seamlessly build that hybrid cloud, right? And so most of our customers, when they start working with OpenShift, they're there on the far right, and maybe they're, building and operating and managing an OpenShift cluster, on their own hardware. Maybe they're doing it on either AWS or Azure, maybe the IBM cloud. And as their needs start to grow, potentially certain workloads you want to push to something like ROSA, where you have these business critical applications. You're not really so worried about the underlying platform itself. You have certain workloads running on a platform that you want to manage, but these other workloads, you're not so concerned with the underlying platform. And so, providing that flexibility to really start to get started with hybrid cloud adoption. So I'll talk a little bit about this again, and this really just builds on what we were talking about before, but these are the different deployment models. Openshift Dedicated and Openshift or ROSA, really the key uses here: organizations that want to alleviate themselves of the complexity in managing the environment and focus on their applications. Not all workloads are going to be tuned for that. Sometimes you still need to have a high degree of customization of the underlying platform, especially when it comes to things like multi-tenancy, providing a platform for specific use cases. I know, like most telcos that I work with, most organizations within the banking industry, they're leveraging still OpenShift Container Platform, and maybe they're running that on AWS because they are able to leverage AWS and really kind of the best public cloud out there, one of the best public clouds out there. They need that customization. They need to maybe rip and replace certain key services that we've embedded into OpenShift. Still under the hood with OpenShift is Kubernetes, and Kubernetes still provides, even our brand of or flavor of Kubernetes still provides all of these pluggable interfaces. And so, I'll get one example. We work with pretty much all the large telcos in the world, and a lot of them have very specific needs for their workloads. And so maybe, the monitoring service that we've built and shipped with OpenShift, maybe it doesn't meet their needs. Maybe they have some very highly tailored needs. And so, one of the largest telcos that we work with is actually started to rip out certain components that we ship with Kubernetes with OpenShift and build their own. They have the subject matter experts in-house that can do so. And so for them, at least for those workloads that are leveraging, things like 5G, things like edge use cases, they still have a need to manage themselves because they have these services that they're integrating themselves that are very, very key to their specific workloads and use cases. Whereas maybe organizations who are just getting started with OpenShift, just getting started with container-based application development, they don't maybe have the OpenShift experience, or maybe they don't really have the need to have this kind of highly customized deployment. And so they're really able to leverage this consumption model as a service. They're really able to leverage, leaning on AWS and Red Hat to be their subject matter experts when it comes to the installation and ongoing management of the platform. And we can start to work with their development teams or their DevOps teams to understand cloud native application development and what kind of tooling already comes with this service that they can start to take advantage of. The same development model life cycle is going to be the same no matter what your deployment model is. We still have a need to enable developers and development teams on how to get started, containerize their applications, how to start addressing building net new, greenfield application development, and really start to take advantage of a lot of the key components and services that something like OpenShift provides. So this kind of builds on what those previous slides were saying, right? If you take a look at these, based on the deployment model that's right for your organization, maybe you are looking to take advantage of serverless capabilities of Red Hat OpenShift. Well, guess what? All three of these deployment methods would provide that elasticity and ability for you. But as you start to look at cloud native virtualization or deploying Windows containers, or maybe you want to use a very specific version of OpenShift, based on what your needs are, you may want to build and manage in-house. But as you start to look at in this, I think I skipped a slide here. There we go. There we go. As you start to look at, having a need for global availability or easy procurement with a consolidated billing program, especially if you have, favorable relationship with AWS and you want to be able to, manage your platform the same way you're managing all of these other services, which is to say, you don't want to manage these different services. You want to lean on Red Hat and AWS's experts to really manage this for you. That's where Openshift Service on AWS or Openshift Dedicated running on AWS, a managed version of Openshift really can come into play. And again, I would say the largest reason, other than wanting to have this kind of pay-as-you-go subscription model or wanting to have easy procurement, I would say that the number one reason that I see some of our customers starting to adopt something like Rosa are that third line item there. You don't have the resources, or maybe you don't have the skill set in place to maintain, upgrade, or secure OpenShift as a platform. And that's really where you have to start looking at it more from like a cost analysis, cost benefit analysis standpoint. Does it make sense to, especially based on the workloads that you have, does it make sense to buy or rent, whether that's, professional services or going out and paying for training or around, for your operations teams, or looking to hire people coming in with this skill set. And, Kubernetes is, I would say really skyrocketed adoption within the last 5 years or so, but especially so within the last year or two. I know that when I first came into Red Hat, we were still pretty much only having conversations around Linux. We were having a lot of conversations around OpenStack, our private cloud platform. OpenShift was still somewhat in its infancy. And now I would say I haven't gone a day in the last probably 3 years without having several conversations around OpenShift adoption. Now, as we start to really cross into this focus on managed OpenShift, a lot of it is due to, having the flexibility to, deploy and sort of, as I used to say, I can't remember what that infomercial was, but you want to set it and forget it, right? You want to be able to deploy a platform that is going to be completely managed and deployed by subject matter experts, so you don't have to really start to invest into that. That's not to say that, you can only go with one of these options. OpenShift is really meant to, when you look at an OpenShift cluster, you can have it set up so you have all three of these in place. And the beauty of something like OpenShift, we provide something called Advanced Cluster Management, or what we call internally RACM, Red Hat Advanced Cluster Management, RHACM. And what that provides is really a single pane of glass, so you can get visibility into all of your disparate clusters and see and manage them all from one place. Now, some of those you're really only getting visibility into because if they are ROSA deployed, you don't really have a lot of control on that cluster like you would with just your standard OpenShift container platform cluster. But having visibility, having the ability to see what workloads are running where, getting some kind of feedback, especially for your developers, you want to be able to get in the moment feedback on how your applications are performing, especially across different changes. The beauty is that because these applications are really kind of standardized, and because the platform of which they're running on top of is also the same across no matter what infrastructure or deployment method, your application should be running the same no matter if it's being deployed on top of ROSA, on top of OCP, on top of OpenShift running on Azure, on top of the IBM cloud. It shouldn't matter. You're getting the same experience across the board and the same kind of feedback from your applications across the board as well. And apologies, it looks like I did skip a couple slides there, but you can see here a couple different examples for why you may still want to run OpenShift container platform, especially when you start to look at highly specialized workloads, or again, I mentioned running a specific version of OpenShift. Deploying Windows containers is something that is a relatively new use case within OpenShift. I want to say that 4.6 or 4.7 introduced the availability to running and deploying and managing Windows containers within OpenShift. We just released 4.9, which provides things like single node OpenShift deployments, and all of those things can also be deployed whether on OpenShift service on AWS or on OpenShift container platform as well. So, again, with Rosa, what you're getting is that full stack management and expertise, right? So AWS provides managed services throughout the entire stack. So that's infrastructure, application, tools, all without vendor lock-in. It provides, our customers choice, a consistent experience, and the unified support that they need. And then Red Hat's and AWS's expert SRE teams, and again, these are hybrid teams, right? So it's not like you go to Red Hat for one piece and AWS for another piece. Our teams are working together completely. And so, as soon as you open a ticket for any kind of issue you're having, you're working with an SRE team that's across both organizations to deliver and support, not only the control plane piece, but the different integrated tools, whether they're coming from OpenShift or coming from AWS. And so, the inclusion of this SRE team is really, I would say, the key benefit, other than, being able to take advantage of, what OpenShift and AWS are really providing. I would say having that SRE team, it really can't be undersold, right? It's a huge benefit to have this really ongoing expertise built into the service. And as your team's maturity with OpenShift grows, you're able to start looking at some of those other edge case deployments. Maybe you want to start to grow your self-managed OpenShift footprint as well, and start to onboard certain workloads onto a self-managed, more customized version of OpenShift. But all of this is built to support OpenShift, right? One of the largest benefits to using something like Rosa is using OpenShift, right? So, working alongside the OpenShift experts, you're building your applications on the best build of Kubernetes that's out there. You're providing that powerful and flexible platform with a reliable and proactive managed service to make your life easier. So, it really is a flexible and powerful Kubernetes engine that has things like integrated security, all these different platform capabilities, and a consistent user experience no matter where it's actually being deployed. And then again, consistent native experience across different clouds. Rosa is offered natively across clouds, removing the vendor lock-in, offering the ability to more easily manage multiple clouds depending on the workload and what your teams or what your organization's specific needs are. It gives more of a choice and ease of use, right? So users can take advantage of the different AWS features like native on-demand billing, consistent support management between Red Hat and AWS, expanded deployment regions. We talked about availability zones. That's something that exists just within AWS. Red Hat or OpenShift provides the ability to create different data centers and locations, but AWS then adds on availability zones to have even more availability to the different applications and workloads and even different clusters. So, you're really getting kind of that hybrid Kubernetes platform that is cloud ready, streamlined access to different AWS services. So things like the AWS service broker integration, AWS operators. So AWS services are seamlessly provisioned and exposed directly through OpenShift. So developers can launch and deploy AWS services without ever having to leave the OpenShift interface. I mentioned this a few times already, but having that consistency across environments, applications and workloads behave the same across your entire life cycle. So whether it's in your dev or test or production environments, and all of this can be self-service, right? You don't have to have a developer open up a ticket with your operations team. They have the ability to self-service a lot of this themselves. Having that unified experience, I talked about that single pane of glass across these different hybrid clouds. Some of our customers are just deploying onto AWS, but some of our more mature customers, they are deploying across multiple clouds. Maybe they're building their own cloud and deploying on top of that as well. So having that unified experience across the hybrid cloud, agile development, DevSecOps methodologies, work both on-prem, but also on AWS. And then flexible application deployment, deploying existing applications on cloud infrastructure to benefit more, agility, scalability, elasticity, and then being able to leverage the Red Hat and AWS SRE teams to really get started with, cloud native development and, microservices development as well. So, and then finally, rapid development capabilities, right? Automation, self-service capabilities, they allow developers just focus on building, their products instead of having to manage commodity application components. Really, we're trying to streamline as much as we can the development process. And in some cases, that sounds almost counter to, DevOps, where, we have these, hybrid cross-functional teams. We also want to, delineate what responsibilities belong to which teams, right? We don't want developers to have to worry about all these kind of operational pieces. And we certainly don't want operations teams, when it comes to a self-managed OpenShift, to have to worry about any kind of development requirements. So before we get into kind of the training piece, I wanted to just recap, really what ROSA provides, right? It's installed and maintained by Red Hat. It's Red Hat owned or customer owned on the AWS account. There's consumption-based billing available as well. You get your choice of region, node size, availability zone distribution. There's all kinds of integration. When, I gave the example of authentication before. So having all of these kind of pluggable interfaces, the same kind of, services that you may already be using and leveraging with AWS, integrated logging and metrics. And again, you get visibility in all of that in a central platform. There's OpenShift cluster management, or RACM, ACM, managed upgrades and patching. So none of your teams have to worry about the actual ongoing maintenance or operations of the OpenShift platform. There's VPN and VPC peering. There's premium Red Hat support that's provided here. And again, we're blending Red Hat and AWS's enterprise IT knowledge and experience into ROSA, right? So, all of this is done by the AWS console. You're getting all of this is really built on the foundation of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, or technically, I think it's Core OS, which is basically a container native immutable version of RHEL. You're getting that unified billing, so you're able to leverage your existing AWS commitment. You're still getting access and support from the Red Hat side as well, but you're getting all of this just in one single unified bill. Whereas with a managed or a self-managed OpenShift, you're really paying, Red Hat for the subscription side and paying AWS for the consumption side. So having all of this in one neat, tidy bill. The support side, obviously key, having a team to be able to leverage that is both integrated into the platform, but also leverages subject matter experts from the Red Hat team and the AWS team. And then having and being able to leverage all of those different AWS cloud native services that we've mentioned before, all baked into the platform. And what that really looks like, this is what it looks like to run your own Red Hat OpenShift cluster. And now that's not to say that this isn't, that this isn't feasible, right? We have plenty of customers who are running OpenShift on AWS infrastructure. This is just a really high level architecture diagram to run OpenShift or OpenShift Container Platform, again, the self-managed version on AWS. You can see that really the only thing that's being managed by Red Hat and AWS is just the support piece, right? You're having to worry about or manage all of the cluster management, the cluster creation, the life cycle of the application from development to ongoing user management. All of that is going to be up to the customer, up to you to manage. Whereas a fully managed cluster with ROSA, you're really just worrying about user management, project and quota management, application lifecycle piece. Everything else is going to be taken off of your plate. And then we, AWS and Red Hat, have the economies of scale to make this happen because we built both the underlying platform AWS and then the platform sitting on top of that, OpenShift. So it really is a really great way to take a lot off of your team's plate, especially when it comes to a less mature organization that hasn't really started with a platform like OpenShift.
John, I just wanted to jump in here. We have about 5 more minutes until the question period. We have some great questions coming in.
Awesome, awesome. Well, we are right almost at the end. What this really just shows is kind of what managed OpenShift versus the Kubernetes stack looks like. Really what we're looking at from a total cost of ownership perspective, it's much cheaper for an OpenShift managed service. And again, this can run on any of the public clouds you see there at the bottom. Specifically, we're talking about AWS here. Do your internal resources have the time to dedicate to this, right? Would you rather have them on projects specific to the growth of your business? In this example, you're using like a really conservative estimate of like a 0.5 FTE, but you can estimate, how many resources you would need to support your business 24/7. So, when thinking about a managed versus a self-managed OpenShift, you have to consider the cost of purchase, manage, integrate, secure your operational services, things like monitoring, logging, metrics, CI/CD, and those are all separate services that you have to find and manage and keep up to date on your own Kubernetes distribution. Again, with OpenShift, a lot of that is going to be provided, but you still have to have the subject matter experts in place to monitor and to actually operate the platform. So it's clear, obviously, vanilla Kubernetes and building in the integrations for all these is really unfeasible. But even if you're just getting started, you really have to start to look at all of the different costs for operating and managing the platform versus something that's really provided on a managed version of OpenShift. So how do you get started? We do offer a lot of training around OpenShift. Now, for a managed OpenShift, you're really just going to be looking at this developer track and one of our higher level operations courses. I mentioned before that there are still things that you have to manage within ROSA, but you're really shrinking down your responsibilities to just a couple components, right? Putting in like role-based access controls, managing the application lifecycle. The application piece is really where your team comes into play, whereas everything that's tied to the platform is going to be managed by AWS and by Red Hat in conjunction. And so, we do offer a introduction level course that gets teams familiar with containerization, that gets them, building containers, understanding the relationship between Kubernetes as container orchestration and OpenShift. But all down that right side is our developer track. And that's really where we help our development team customers to really start working on containerizing their applications. So more like brownfield development, but then also introducing cloud native microservices development as well. And so we offer multiple courses around all of these things that fall on the development side of the house to really get them started and throughout the life cycle ongoing with building these applications for OpenShift. Now, for those of you that may be interested in more of a self-managed OpenShift side, we do offer obviously that administration operations track around operating a production Kubernetes cluster. That's really kind of your day 0, day 1 operations. The OpenShift administration 3 core scaling Kubernetes deployments in the enterprise. That's more your day 2 operations. We get into logging and metrics and GitOps workflows. Some topics that are still going to be very, very relevant and interesting to those of you that may be working in a managed OpenShift as well. And then we do offer a couple labs around installation, different methods of installation across different clouds, or bare metal on something like vSphere if you're looking to deploy on VMware. And then for those of you that may be coming from OpenShift 3, migrating to OpenShift 4, we do have a migration lab that walks you through the actual cluster migration, as well as the migration toolkit for the applications running on that cluster as well. In addition to each of these different courses, I did see a question in there earlier around certification. I can't speak to any of the pricing or anything like that, but we do offer certifications across all of these different use cases, whether it be at the container Kubernetes level, at OpenShift cluster management level, and obviously across multiple development courses as well. We do offer certifications for each of those courses. We do now have the ability to do remote certification as well. So if you're still in a location where maybe one of our testing centers hasn't opened yet, you do have the flexibility to take that on your own hardware at home. No need to install anything. You're actually just booting from a USB drive. We provide an image for you that you boot into, so you're able to take that from the comfort of your own home. And with that, Alex, I'll kick it back over to you, and then we can jump into the Q&A.
Sure. And for everyone who attended this webinar, we have an exclusive saving offer. You can save up to 15% off your next virtual or classroom course, and 10% off on-demand subscriptions and self-paced courses. So if you go to our website, the URL is right there, exitcertified.com/learn21. Using the promo code learn21, that's how you take advantage of these savings if you register before November 30th. So thank you all so much. We had some great questions come in. So we'll try to get through all of them in these last few minutes. John, the first one, I think it's why choose OpenShift versus Rancher?
Yeah, so, it's a really good question. I would say it's really, I'm probably a more biased person to answer as well. I would say that Rancher is a tool for managing Kubernetes clusters, whereas OpenShift is more of an actual Kubernetes distribution. Obviously, so Rancher is more like in-house Kubernetes, something like EKS or GKE, or one of those other kind of cloud-hosted Kubernetes distributions. EKS, AKS are probably the big two, whereas OpenShift is more of an actual Kubernetes distribution and can run on all those different clouds. I would say OpenShift is more feature heavy and is much more of a customizable platform than Rancher is going to be. From a pricing perspective, I really couldn't say, there's going to be use cases where I believe Rancher may be less expensive, but I honestly, I couldn't say, but really it just comes down to one as a platform versus one as kind of a managed platform as well.
Great. Next question, once on OpenShift on-prem, what would the cloud onboarding be? Should the move be done gradually?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think, it really all depends on the workloads themselves, right? So, if you have OpenShift on-prem and you're wanting to move towards those workloads being on a cloud-hosted version of OpenShift, it's really easy to move those applications across the different data centers or from an on-prem data center onto the cloud, right? I mentioned, that single pane of glass, being able to have visibility into all these different clusters. Usually I would say the move should be done gradually, but the benefit of containerized workloads is there's a standardized format, right? And so no matter where your platform is actually located, no matter what the infrastructure is, it's standardized on a platform, RHEL or RHEL Core OS, and then those containers themselves are standardized as well. So, we're eliminating the kind of issue of, it worked on my environment, why isn't it working on yours? By design, it's meant to work the same across both of those environments. So in theory, it shouldn't have to be a gradual change. In fact, we have a lot of customers now who are, as they're migrating from OpenShift 3 to OpenShift 4, they're also migrating infrastructure. They're moving away from on-prem to one of these either cloud-hosted or cloud-managed OpenShift flavors. And in doing so, they're immediately migrating all of their workloads from one to the other. And from a experience standpoint, it should be identical, right? And so I don't think that there's a right or wrong answer to that. I'm inclined to be a little more old school and want to have kind of both running and existing simultaneously, so that especially on the development side, I can start to see if there are any kind of differences across the different platforms. But in theory, there should not be a difference.
Great. Is Red Hat offering OpenShift as a service or product?
So both. OpenShift Container Platform is OpenShift as a product, and OpenShift that you're managing yourself. Whereas OpenShift ROSA, Red Hat OpenShift Service on AWS, is really more a consumption-based model, or even OpenShift Dedicated is really more of a service, right? So it is, because we're taking the management of the platform off of the table for you, off of your workload, it really is more a consumption-based model, and you're really, able to view OpenShift as a service, whereas OpenShift Container Platform, the differentiator there is that you're managing the platform yourself. you're managing updates and the entire life cycle from a platform perspective. And so, the answer is both. It really just depends on how you're deploying.
Another person asks, could you also comment on if Docker is not being in K8's support scope, and should we continue to use Docker as a service or on first?
Yeah, so Red Hat has moved towards Podman as our container runtime. Podman just offers a few features that Docker didn't, and I believe Docker is starting to now, but things like rootless containers was a big feature of this. From a experience standpoint, from a command standpoint, Podman and Docker are basically exactly the same. In fact, when we started to make this change, and this started really as a Linux container thing, right? It was containers running directly on RHEL as opposed to running on OpenShift. When we started to integrate this change, I went into my bash RC and just alias Docker to Podman so that I could still continue to run Docker commands and they would just alias over to Podman. And again, the command structure is exactly the same. It's the same thing like with Kubernetes and OpenShift. If you're used to Kubernetes and working with vanilla Kubernetes, you're used to the kubectl command tree and structure and all those different options. All those map over to OpenShift. So if you're using the OpenShift CLI, it's just OC. It's exactly the same thing. There are certain things that, or I should say artifacts within OpenShift that are a little bit different than Kubernetes, or at least they're named different things. Namespaces is one of them. And so, I would say Kubernetes still supports Docker as far as I'm aware. It's Red Hat's enterprise Kubernetes OpenShift that is standardized on Podman now.
I think the next question was in relation to slide 11. Is it similar to Terraform?
I would have to go back and look at what slide 11 said.
That's okay. We'll move on to the next one. On elasticity, who takes over, OpenShift or AWS?
Good question. It's going to, with ROSA, AWS is kind of taking over for elasticity with obviously OpenShift Container Platform. All of the services and features are managed or a component of OpenShift. The platform itself is relatively unchanged. It's that we're now integrating a lot of these other AWS services within ROSA and providing that full lifecycle support from a product or from a platform standpoint. So I think is going to depend on the context, but it really also is going to depend on the deployment model.
Does OpenShift only support AWS, or does it support other cloud vendors like GCP, Azure Cloud?
So yeah, I mentioned this on one of the slides, but pretty much all the public clouds support OpenShift. ROSA is a specific managed version of OpenShift that runs on AWS. And then there's also OpenShift on AWS, which is a self-managed version of OpenShift that, or not version of OpenShift, but it's just the case of deploying OpenShift on AWS. There are other managed versions of OpenShift that run on the other clouds. So there's ROIC, which is Red Hat OpenShift on the IBM cloud. That's a managed version of OpenShift on the IBM cloud. You can also deploy OpenShift on the Google cloud. There's OpenShift on Azure cloud. There's also Azure Red Hat OpenShift, which is again a managed version of OpenShift on the Azure cloud. So all the major cloud vendors, and then you can also deploy on something like OpenStack, which is Red Hat's cloud platform. So if you wanted to run it on a private cloud that you're managing yourself, you would have that ability to do so as well. And then I think that there was a follow-up around like the difference between OpenShift from something like GKE that ties back to that question around kind of Rancher as well. That, one of them is more like Kubernetes as a service, whereas OpenShift is more a platform. Obviously you're getting a lot of the same benefits, but I think that the use cases are going to be slightly different, where OpenShift is a fully featured platform versus being able to just have, like a Rancher or like a GKE or an AKS or an EKS where you really just want Kubernetes as a service running. And then you're integrating, something like GKE with a lot of the other Google components for like things like CI/CD and security and monitoring and logging. Whereas OpenShift has all of those features just built in under the hood.
Excellent. There were a few more questions we're not going to be able to get to, but we will follow up with the individuals who did ask those questions. So thank you. Thank you to the Red Hat team, John, for an excellent presentation, and for everyone for joining today. Thank you so much. Thanks all. Bye-bye.